So today's lesson is about functions. Now, the idea of a function is this, it has to do a little bit with repeating code, but it's really a better word for it would be reusable code. So if we have some code that we know that we might use it in many general situations, not just this one specific situation, that it could be used another way, we actually will work on that code and perfect it to be a general purpose function. And then a function, the idea of a function then is that that little bit of code can be called up when we need it. The parameters sent to it, parameters are going to have input data that needs to go into the function. The function will process them and then give you some output. So that's the idea of a function. Now, the pseudocode we've already talked about. So when we say functions in pseudocode, we mean how can we look at functions using pseudocode, which we already know about. And so this is a bit of review. We have talked about the idea that we need to have, by the way, this is stuff that's going to come up in the quiz that you're going to have in like an hour or so, I suppose. These are things that were mentioned before, and that they'll sort of come up there. But do we know what is sequence? Do we know what is selection? Do we know what is repetition? So sequence just means that, and that's the default state, by the way, of a program, which is basically we start at the start of the program and we go work through to the end. That's what we mean by sequence. Each line of code will only happen after the line of code before it, except when you have branching, and branching is caused by conditions and selection. So conditionals are things like if this, then that, right? A condition. And loopings can come from that, and we saw that in our flowcharts. So we've probably seen functions before in connection with mathematics. And if you've seen a function in mathematics, you'll know that you have the function is going to operate on what data we put into it. So this function here, if you put in a value for x, it will return some value. If, for example, if you put the value of 10 in for x, so function f operating on x, if you put the value 10 in, 10 would be squared and 1 would be added to it. So fx, if x was 10, f10, the value would be 100 plus 1, 101. Now, for function g, you could add two parameters, x and y. And let's say you put the parameters 10 and 5. Then what would happen is 10 plus 2 times 5, so 10 plus 10, plus 2 times 5 times 10, so 100. So 10 plus 10 plus 100 plus 2. So that'd be 122. So the function works, would return a value when we put into we enter the parameters, it produces a value. This is very similar to the way that functions work for us in programming. So another name for a function is a subroutine, as is mentioned there, and it's going to have a sequence of instructions, maybe have some control structures. Now it says there includes possibly. There's basically anything that you can put into a bunch of code can go into a subroutine. Typically, it's going to output a result. It doesn't have to, and but yeah, usually it does. And we'll give it a unique name. Now, this diagram doesn't show the double line very, very strongly, but it is there. Maha. See. The double line is kind of faint, but the rectangle here, which looks like a rectangle for a process, is actually showing us a rectangle for a function. And so we have a double line on the edge. That's what it means by the double line on the edge. So this is just showing you the diagram icon or shape that we would use for a function. So let's say that we had this bit of code. One of the things that we can do with a function is if we have a bit of code that looks a little bit big and bit complicated, we can actually extract part of it out and put that into a function, and then perfect it and then use it later. So that's the idea here. That's why we've got these sort of green things here, but let's see. What we've got in the blue is we've got 3 inputs. The input for grade, of test, of assignment, and of, what's the other, quizzes. And then we have this function that we're going to call, we're going to create a function out of this called average 3. And how that's going to work is it's going to take the total of those 3 and divide it by 3 to give the average. Now this is showing a flow chart of all of that happening without a function. But what we could do is we could say, well, look, here's our inputs. We can just take those 3 inputs that are in blue and put them into this green stuff. Let's call this green stuff a function. And then we get the output from it. So we could say all this green stuff, we'll remove that from our program and set it aside as a function, and we'll call the function, pass it its parameters, and we'll get the values out. And so there we are. We've replaced those 2 green things there with this black thing and said, well, this is a function. Somewhere else, we went and wrote the function. And what the function does is says, take in 3 parameters. And here we've renamed them, because over here they were assignment, quiz, and test. And we've renamed them to be X, Y, and Z. And what do we do with X, Y, and Z? We just add them together, and then we divide by 3, we return the result. And so what's going to happen here is we get our inputs. The inputs are passed into this function. Processing at that point will be passed over to the function, as will the parameters. So the parameters make the 3 things in the input there, parameter list. They get transferred over here by the order that they appear here. So the first one is assignment. So that's the first one here is X. So X is like assignment. The second one is quiz. So the second one over here is Y. So that's like quiz. And then test is the third one. And so what's going to happen is when it gets to here, transfer of program control will occur. And the program control will transfer over to running the function. And then it will return the value. Right, so functions can have inputs and outputs. The inputs, I've referred to them as parameters. The outputs, we refer that using a thing called, we say it returns a value. And the returned value is returned back to the main program. And actually processing continues on from the point where we call the function. We go and process the current function. Then when we finish the function, we continue on in our processing in sequence from there on. And that's what that means. Okay, so there's the other thing. This is a hard idea to get if you don't concentrate. But if you concentrate, you'll get it. We have this concept of local and global variables. The idea is a variable, when you declare it inside a bit of in a function or in a program, it's only available within the function which it has been declared in. So if you look at that function, it declared variables X, Y, and Z, use them as parameters. X, Y, and Z are only accessible inside the function. Now, global variables that are created in the main program, they're accessible anywhere. I think we're probably going to have to come back to that later. All right, so we've got an activity. Before you go and do that activity, actually, I think this is where we'll pick up next lesson on that. But what I want to do is I want to show you, because I know that's kind of, I want to show you this example that we talked about in today's lesson. Now, what you're looking at now is Python, but what I understand is we're going to be using Python pretty soon anyways. Now, this Python's got a lot more lines of code in it than is necessary to solve this problem. The reason why is I wanted you to see every line of code, what happens at every line of code. So it's got a print statement after basically every line of code. So just so that when we run the program, you'll be able to see what's happening. All right, so we've got this thing, def. The def is short for define. This is our function. And if you look at it, it just does, it's exactly what was in that slide, right? Takes 3 numbers, adds them together and divides them by 3 and returns the result, which is going to be an an average, right? The average of three numbers. So that's why this is the function average of three numbers. It takes in three numbers. It returns a single number, which is the average. And so what we're doing here is just printing those things as it happens. Now, this is actually where the program starts. We define the average there, but here is where the program starts. What's happening here is we have a variable called assignment. We ask the user and they give us a number. We have a variable called quiz. We ask the user and they give us a number. Same for tests. So three variables are entered. Then what happens here? Do you see? It says overall is equal to average. And then it opens the brackets and says three variables. So what's this doing? This is actually calling the function. This is where the function is called. Here's where it's declared, and here's where it's called. At this point, these three variables are passed, and control goes to the function. The function takes those variables in the order that they are presented. A assignment quiz test becomes X, Y, Z, and then processes them. When it's finished, then it goes there. Now, when I'm going to run this program, and because I put all the print statements in, then you should be able to see how the program runs. So please look here and notice the lines. I'm calling this line 2, line 3. Well, there's some lines here that are missing. There's nothing much happening there. Line 7, line 8, line 9, line 10, line 11. So I've got these lines of code there, all right? When we run the program, watch and see the order that the lines are happening. Okay, so let's do that. Let's run the program. So how we do it here is with Python, we just run it. You can use F5 or you can run it. So give me three numbers, assignment grade, or I can just make them 60, 80, 50. Okay, so that average should be, somewhere between 50 and 70, I suppose, 60 and 70. All right, so the important thing is let's look at how it runs. So when we started it started with line 7. But when we looked at the code, if we look at the code, let me pull this over here. If we look at the code, we got lines over here, line 2, line 3. It didn't start at line 2 or 3. It started at line 7. The program started here, okay? We didn't do the function until we called it here. This is where we called the function. So the program started here at line 7. You see that, line 7, printed that. Then it went to line 8, printed that. Then it went to line 9, printed that. Then, immediately after it went to line 9, what did it do? It goes and does line 2. Why? Because look at what line 9 does. Line 9, what does line 9 do? Line 9 calls the function. This is the function call. At this point, the function which we declared up here, we're going to transfer control of the program from here to here. And we're going to do these things. So that's why we get line 2. And there's those three values, X, Y, and Z, right? X, Y, and Z, which came in here, which were assignment, quiz, and test. Now they're X, Y, Z, right? And so if I, yeah, well, that's fine. And then we've got a total, which is S. And then we've got an average, which is, what was the average? 63.3. Yeah. And so then after that, when that's finished, when we've done line 2 and 3, then we go and do line 10, and then we go and do line 11. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you how the functions work. Looking at it again this way, you see that what we did in this code is here were our first few lines. All right, this was actually line 7, line 8, line 9, right? Then we got to here, and we went and did line 2 and line 3. That's the way we wrote the program, right? This was the function. We declared the function first, line 2, line 3. But when we ran the function, we started here, line 7, line 8, line 9, call the function, take these values, pass them in here. Then we went there, there, there. Only when we were finished there, we returned and came back there. And so I hope you were able to see that demonstration using it actually in a example of a Python program. You guys will be doing Python programs soon, inshallah. But yeah, yes. The 2 lines down the side here. Yeah, that's just a notation. Just like a square means a process, a square with 2 lines means it's a process, which is a function. So that means that somewhere we've declared that function and it has some code inside it. Sorry? Can you use it in the whole function? No, not here. No. Just in this one that you're using to call it. This is saying that this is a function. Because if you used it here, that would mean that this is a function. This is not a function. This is just a process inside a function. Yeah, these are just normal processes. This is a function, which means that somewhere there exists a function with this name. And here it is. All right, so I hope that kind of makes sense to you. We'll go and finish that later. What I'm going to do now is turn over the time to you. You've got 10 minutes. You can ask me some questions if you want, or the test quizzes will open in 10 minutes time. Let me stop the recording because I think we're done that.